What's important is guys like Franz Schubert, who wrote the Unfinished Symphony and wrote Ave Maria, died with 12 cents in his pocket and syphilis.
The word chick flick is overused, and I feel partly responsible for it. I don't have any hankering to shoot an action movie because, what you have to do is you have to shoot a lot of things like people's foot hitting the brake.
He was a Schindler survivor, and he started telling me about Schindler as we waited for my credit card charges to be cleared. He asked me what I did for a living. I said I was a writer. He hammered with this Schindler story.
I have a dummy at home of Slappy, and I also have a dummy of me. It looks exactly like me, and they fit together.
I'm John Carney. Welcome to another edition of the Theme Machine. This week we tackle a request of a friend this time and put pen to paper. Someone told me they wanted to know how people behind their favorite books and screenplays write what they wrote. How do they do it? How has their life changed? What are the inspirations? Okay, you got it. This time, chats with Mitch Albom, James Patterson, Nora Ephron, Anne Rice as well. They write, we talk, it all works out. So let's get started with this week's Theme Machine. Coming from a non-traditional family upbringing, I certainly could relate to the scribings of Augustine Burroughs. Crazy families, battles with addiction, domineering parents. Stop me if you've heard these. His debut book, Running with Scissors, must have struck a note with a lot of other people, as it was on the New York Times bestseller list for about 2 months. 4 years later, that book was made into a very successful film that had Annette Bening, among others. And even though he shared his life story, and the book and the film received high acclaim, Burroughs still remained a very private person.
I'm a little surprised that we're having a conversation because everything I've read about you has not been very much written about you, which leads me to believe that you're a pretty private individual.
Actually, yeah, it's true. I am, which is kind of the irony of having written 500 memoirs. I am. I'm private and reserved, and I don't do all the writer things. I mean, I definitely appreciate and I'm grateful for the success I have as a writer because it allows me to keep writing. But I don't go out. You won't see me on tabloid pages or in the magazines leaving the It restaurant in New York City. I mean, if I'm photographed in a magazine, it's because I've been arrested, for parking or something.
But in the height of its popularity of Running with Scissors, only fueled even more by the film, I would think there were people that do get hounded by the paparazzi, famous people like the Paris Hiltons of the land, that want to hang with you.
It just doesn't interest me. I mean, it doesn't. I don't have any desire to develop relationships with people because they're famous. So even if I am contacted, I'm polite and I'll write back to people or but I'm not gonna pay special attention to somebody because they're famous.
Who are you most surprised to hear from the world?
Well, the people I've been most surprised to hear from, unfortunately, I wish I could tell you, but I can't. And the reason I can't is because I'm most surprised that such high-profile, a couple of them have been in the government, high-profile people would write me and confess something so completely private because they read something in my books and felt like they could tell me, which they can. I mean, people do all the time, and I don't go around blabbing anything. But it's just that level of like blind trust I find surprising. I've had that's the thing. I can't even tell you.
You're like literature's version of The Bartender.
That's a funny way to put it, but it's true, I guess. Write a book about yourself and about the things you're most humiliated by your own childhood, and it just opens up other people. But that it's really, it's not something that I would ever complain about. It's a privilege in a weird way to hear people's stories. I mean, the thing is when Running with Scissors and now Wolf too, both of them, they attracted the same kind of thing from the media. People always say in reviews and such, well, how can this be true? How can somebody have gone through all of this? And it amazes me when I read that kind of comment or hear that, because I think must just be so lovely to be a privileged white person and to have gone to the best high school, and then because you need to if you want to get into the best journalism school, McGill or Harvard or Yale, which is where you need to go if you want to end up at one of the best magazines, probably in New York City. Very competitive field journalism. So that's a lot of studying, and that's a lot of doing life according to the book. And how are you going to learn about the dark side of life if you live like that? You're going to learn about it through Quentin Tarantino movies, which is not to say that that's, not a great way to learn, but the fact of the matter is, in many ways, my life has not been that unusual. It's really not been. I think it's startling to people who have had a very traditional experience.
On with the Theme Machine, it's the writers this week. I'm John Carney. Many writers are great at working in solitude and letting the imagination run free, but don't feel quite as relaxed in an interview-type situation. Not the case, though, with Anne Rice. In fact, by the time we were done chatting with our interview, she invited me to her house in New Orleans, an offer, sadly, I didn't get to take her up on as she passed in 2021. Like so many of you, I was smitten with the Vampire Chronicles, to be sure, despite Tom Cruise's effort to ruin it in the film. Another story, another time. Her vampire books redefined the genre. Yeah, there's a vampire genre. Her mythical themes continued with a series on witches after that. That was followed up with a series on Jesus, which, no pun intended, was a subject matter that no one really expected.
Obviously, it goes back to the Holy Land because, well, that's where the story took place.
Right.
But, with the witches and the mummies and the vampires, you made them up. So we couldn't say, hey, now, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. That's not what he would have actually done.
Exactly.
You've picked a character that we're all pretty familiar with, and everybody has their own pretty set ideas. Was that a concern? I mean, did you put some undue pressure on yourself in the interpretation of Jesus?
I put a lot of pressure on myself, no question. There were times when I was terrified, but I felt that I wanted to do this, that it was the best thing that I could do, to make a book that where the presence of Jesus was so strong that when you read that book, you were right there with him. And Christian artists are always taking risks like this. If somebody paints a picture of Jesus, they have to choose the eyes, the hair, the clothes. Okay, I had to choose details with this. I had to make decisions. But the whole idea really was to serve him, to put you there with him and say, yeah, I can see how it happened. I can see what it must have been like in Nazareth when your mother had been visited by an angel. People were whispering, sure. And this is maybe what it felt like. This is what it felt like to be a little boy, a carpenter, working with a big family.
And I think it's what makes you the best. The story of Jesus, there are so many tales, and although he wasn't on the planet very long, there are a lot of different ways you could have gone. But to take the perspective of him as a child, grappling with obvious special powers that the other kids don't have, I mean, it's just so Anne Rice, if you will.
It was. There is a continuity, no doubt, between this and my other books, trying to explore what the great power of Christ was, how it worked out in day-to-day life. I had laid some of the ground for that with Louis, An Interview with the Vampire, and The Vampire Lestat, and Memnoch the Devil, all of those books, taking the supernatural as fact and saying, this is real, and how did it play out?
Although romantic and beautiful, the other books also were graphically violent, and they are things that people around the globe have meetings and chat groups and websites, and phenomenon that you built before will continue to be incredibly strong. Is that a problem for you in the sense that, you're still the vampire lady to a lot of people, and you've had a religious epiphany?
It's not really a problem. I think it's again, I want to use the word gratitude. I'm glad all that has happened. And if I can invite those readers to read this book, then it's all worked out for a purpose. Time changes this. My books always take a little while to find their true audience. Memnoch the Devil, for example, was a book that was criticized a lot when it came out. People said it's too religious. It's not a vampire novel. What are you doing?
That's Anne Rice, and this is the Theme Machine. I'm John Carney, and it's pen to paper this week as we listen to some of our greatest writers. Another writer whose work is often described as spiritual is Mitch Albom. He spent most of the early part of his career as a sports columnist in Detroit, and he still covers sports and plays in a band and runs a charity and hosts a radio show. But the big change in his life was when he put pen to paper and chronicled his experiences with a former professor who was dying of ALS. The year was 1997 when Mitch published Tuesdays with Morrie.
It's different in that it seems like most places that I talk to know me now, and there's something behind my being there. Whereas when Tuesdays with Morrie came out, it was like, so you're who and you do what and you wrote a book about, because I was a sports writer and I was talking about a man who was dying from ALS, and they didn't quite get it. Now, I guess after 20 years, I have the benefit of when I do a program, they at least they've talked to me before, or they've read the other books or seen the movies, and so there's a bit of a familiarity now that didn't exist back then.
Tuesdays remains the largest selling memoir ever, I believe. I would think, although that's got to be a blessing to have lived that story, but for it to be as accepted and to free you up to do other things and the other things it's afforded you over the years. But was there a point where you thought, I'm never going to come out from under that, oh, you're the Tuesdays with Morrie guy?
No, because I never felt like I was under anything. I'm proud of Tuesdays with Morrie, and I'm very proud of the fact that I didn't write it to be a bestseller. I wrote it to pay my old professor's medical bills, and it was probably the first time in my professional life that I ever did anything that wasn't just sort of oriented towards my own ambitions and success, and it ended up being my greatest success. So I learned a lot from that, and I've always been proud that it's still being used in schools, and kids are reading it, and it's being taught in different languages, and I never try to run away from it or shy away from it, and I never feel burdened by it, and nor do I feel a need to write Wednesdays with Morrie or Chicken Soup with Morrie or anything, which is, been those kinds of offers come every 5 minutes. I mean, and I say, no, that was what happened. I'm delighted that it's been embraced, but there's nothing more to say about that particular thing. And it's one of the reasons, John, that I went into novel writing and fiction and movies and things, because I'm not going to just repeat the same thing over and over again. There are many more lessons to be learned in a long life, and hopefully, if I do things for the right reasons, they'll be successful in whatever measure they're successful.
Well, then, do you mind if I write Chicken Soup with Morrie?
Go ahead.
I look down the book of the list of offerings you have given us besides Tuesdays. There's Phone Call from Heaven, 5 people you meet in heaven, Have a Little Faith. I don't think people would be surprised if they learned that you were selling healing crystals on the internet. So is this faith thing deeply, why do you go back to that well in your scribing so much?
Well, I don't think you should be fooled too much by the word heaven. I mean, I am not a religious writer. Have a Little Faith was a nonfiction book about a rabbi who asked me to write his eulogy, and a pastor who ran a church for homeless people with a hole in its roof, which I found a really interesting contrast of people. And I thought, I wanted to write something about faith in our time and in America, and how two really different men of faith could still have a universal thing in common. But it wasn't, and nor are any of my books, this is what religion should be. This is what you should believe. Here's a story that's kind of a couched, hidden, but really a religious themed story. 5 People You Meet in Heaven is a book about not counting and thinking that you don't matter in your life. And when you get to heaven, you meet 5 people who tell you how they were influenced by you. The First Phone Call from Heaven is a book about not about heaven at all. It's about what would happen if people started getting phone calls from people who have passed away, and what would you say to them, and how would that change your belief about what comes next if you started to actually hear from people who were there. But none of them, involve this is the God you should worship, this is the place you should go, this is what you should say. I'm not dogmatic in that way, in any way, and so I have my faith the way other people do, but it's not something that I browbeat anybody over in my writing, even though the word heaven has appeared in 2 of my books.
Along with all of his projects, one of Mitch's musical efforts is a writer supergroup, and I use the term super loosely. The Rock Bottom Remainders, which features Stephen King, Amy Tan, Dave Barry, and others. Well, it's just good they can write. As we put pen to paper and share some chats with these writers on the Theme Machine, let's turn to one of the most eclectic individuals in my mix, Kinky Friedman. A true Renaissance man, he's penned several offbeat mystery novels. He ran for political office in Texas, has hung out with Willie Nelson fairly regularly, and has been known to write a snappy tune or two.
But get your biscuits in the oven and your buns in the bed. And that tune credited to our guest. Please welcome the author of the latest novel, The Love Song of J. Edgar Hoover. It is Kinky Friedman. Hiya, Kink.
Hey, John.
How's it going?
Well, pretty good.
Now, come on, Kinky's got to be a stage name. Your folks did not look at this little baby and say, let's call him Kinky.
Well, with a name like Kinky, you have to be famous or it's a social embarrassment. That's an unfortunate thing.
So, congratulations on the latest. I am hearing nothing but tremendous things about it, The Love Song of J. Edgar Hoover. So,
it's really a joy. People seem to be getting more out of this than I'm actually putting into it right now, which is very, very nice.
One thing that amazes me, and maybe people don't realize about you, is that, even though the books sell well and you do pretty good, and, there's the big writers, there's Stephen King that's guaranteed to sell 1 billion, and Grisham's books are immediately going to be bought by film companies. But you have probably a bigger cult following than any other writer I have seen.
Yeah, I feel very close to cult kind of people like Jesus and Robin Hood and people like that, eccentrics, have always appealed to me. I just remember when I was a kid, when Eisenhower was elected, how overwhelmingly he won. He was a bottle of ketchup on the American kitchen table, and everybody loved him, and he just kind of turned out to be the Garth Brooks of all presidents. We haven't heard his name in 30 years.
The Garth Brooks of all presidents.
So sometimes some of these bestseller types are not don't turn out to be all that important. What's important is guys like Franz Schubert, who wrote the Unfinished Symphony and wrote Ave Maria, died with 12 cents in his pocket and syphilis, and probably also in his pocket, actually. Those are the kind of guys I like. Cult guys. Anyway, I'm in danger of losing my cherished cult status right now. I don't know what's happened here. It's been it's been a long time since I've been around with my band. In the early 70s, the band was called Kinky Friedman and the Texas Jew Boys, and I just thank the Lord we didn't have a hit, because I'd be playing Euro Disney right now with the Pips, or I'd be in Branson or something like that.
Hey, worse things could happen to you.
It's much more fun being a pointy-headed intellectual mystery novelist.
So where did it start for you? Your aspirations coming out of high school. Because it's been a rather jagged path.
Yeah, it's here's the deal. My dream was always to be a country star. If you grow up dreaming of becoming a country star, you'll wind up a best-selling novelist every time. It's just a little trick that God plays on us.
That's just the way it works, huh?
Yeah, I think that's the way it does work. And, of course, now it's the Love Song of J. Edgar Hoover is starting to look like it's going to be a real financial pleasure for the Kingster. And, of course, as I often say, money may buy you a fine dog, but only love can make it wag its tail.
That's a beautiful thing, King.
Thank you very much.
From the childlike mind of Kinky Friedman to an author that writes for kids, R.L. Stine. He's been called the Stephen King of children's literature. This is the Theme Machine, and I'm John Carney, and Stine's Goosebump series alone has over 300 different titles. And with the popularity of the books and characters like Slappy, the Dummy, you knew Hollywood would come calling, and it did. So what does the author make of movie treatments of his creations?
I get about a 50-50 response from authors on whether or not they appreciate the Hollywood treatment of their scribings. Where do you come in?
I come in, I'm lucky. The movies were actually good. I feel very lucky. I'm very happy with the films, and I love being played by Jack Black. He's a much better version of me, I think.
Was there ever a point where you had seen him in some kind of film and just in the back of your mind thought, you know, if we ever made these into a movie, he'd be a good me?
That never happened. That never happened. I never imagined that I would be a character in a movie. How weird is that? You know, I sit home writing these little books. How would I be a character in a movie?
I had a Jimmy Nelson doll and Jimmy Nelson ventriloquism record when I was a kid. But somewhere along the way, just like the same way I went from loving clowns to needing to hide under the bed, that all of a sudden that doll became super creepy. I don't know if it was the Twilight Zone episode or what it was. It was long before Slappy. But I kind of get the feeling that you feel the same way about those dolls.
Well, I had a Jerry Mahoney doll, and it's sort of the same story. But I saw a movie, there's an old British film called Dead of Night, and that's the first time, I think it was from 1947, the first time I ever saw a story where a ventriloquist dummy comes to life and takes over the life of the ventriloquist. And it was really scary. I mean, I saw it not in 1947, but I saw it later, and it was, I guess it stayed with me. I think that's pretty much where Slappy came from.
And Slappy, of all the characters that you had come up with in the Goosebumps series and beyond, Slappy seems to be your R2-D2 and the one that rose above the rest and the most identifiable. As you wrote about him and developed that character, did you ever get a sense that he was going to be the guy that gave everybody the creeps?
No, I don't. To be totally truthful, I don't really understand why he's scary. I don't really get it. But he was so popular in the first Goosebumps movie, and then, of course, he totally took over Goosebumps 2, Haunted Halloween. I now have to write every other Goosebumps book about Slappy. The new series is called Goosebumps Slappy World. And believe me, it doesn't come any easier trying to think of plots for a dummy that comes to life. I think I've written 14 Slappy books.
Yeah. Do you own a ventriloquist doll?
I have a dummy at home of Slappy. I have the dummy. And I also have a dummy of me. It looks exactly like me. And they sit together, and it's a little strange.
I imagine. And that first Goosebumps movie, when that came out a few years ago, huge success, no surprise because the books were so good. But I wonder, as you put pen to paper after that, do you write differently, or do you feel the pressure to write differently, or do you picture pictures as opposed to words in your mind?
I've always been fairly visual. And I didn't have to change. The only change is Slappy all the time. That's the only change.
It's the Theme Machine this week, and pen to paper as we talk to writers. The legal thriller has never been more popular, and certainly one of the top writers in that game is Scott Turow. I'd say as a bit of a leg up, as he was the assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago and remains in private practice to this day. Like others you've heard from, many of Scott's books have been made into TV shows and into movies, but whether or not Hollywood options them, they always do exceedingly well.
Have you written anything that wasn't on the New York Times bestseller list?
The nonfiction books that I wrote won out to start my career in a book about the death penalty, but every novel I've written has been a Times bestseller.
Is that in your head? I mean, knowing you, I don't think it is, but I just wonder if that adds pressure in your head.
No, I don't feel like it adds pressure in my head. It may add pressure to the people at the publishing house or things like that. But, you know, and I have to say a strange thing, which is nobody has a career that lasts forever. You know, athletes retire and go over the mountain. And so I'm... you know, if it someday happens that I publish a book and it's not well received, I hope I take that in stride.
I beg to differ because I think Elvis is still raking it in.
Yeah, well.
So there's that.
There's that, and, there are plenty of authors whose books continue to sell.
You had a life, you had a career as a criminal attorney and prosecutor, and you could have hung that up on the mantle and just lived on the beach and been done with it. So why are you still working this hard?
Well, writing is fun. I don't want to say it out loud for fear that too many of the people listening to us will decide to do it as well.
Good point.
I always tell people that if they can arrange to become a best-selling author, they ought to do it because it's a great life. And that I truly mean. I told my wife, I'm going upstairs. I say it every morning, I'm going upstairs to play with my imaginary friends. And the writing process itself, some writers suffer through it. I don't. As I settle into a book, which is off to the races on the next one, I'm very excited. I'm excited to see how it's going to turn out. I'm excited to deal with the problems of how to, get the story from point A to point Z. And, I feel absolutely no urge to quit. So, but it's a great question. I appreciate your asking it.
Well, then who would I have on the show? If you quit, then what would I do, Scott?
I know. It's just, it's you and me and the barren spots in between. So,
and I think about everything involved in the writing process, and it's probably why I don't do it. Because you have to remember if Bill had brown hair, if you're going to go with the series, or if you're going to do a completely new thing. How do I come up with a crime that doesn't sound like the book I just wrote? I'd lose my mind.
Yeah, well, you do have to remember if Bill has brown hair. I grant you that. Although I suppose it might be fun for somebody to write a book where the main character, his hair changes, maybe the gender would change, maybe the age would change from page to page.
He's got mood hair.
Right. It is possible. But yeah, you do have to remember a certain amount to be a writer. There's no question about that.
It's the Theme Machine, and that's Scott Turow, who, like Mitch Albom, also is in the band The Rock Bottom Remainders. You'd think I was just sitting backstage with a mic, because also in that group is columnist and author Dave Barry. Now, with Dave, we went a little deeper about being a columnist as opposed to writing books. And one thing I learned is that no matter the subject matter, someone is not going to be happy, even if it's something as simple as a Neil Diamond lyric.
I said to no one there, and no one heard it all, not even the chair. And I'm thinking, no kidding, Neil. It didn't hear you because it's a chair. It's a piece of furniture. Probably the ottoman didn't pick up on it either, Neil. But anyway, that was not the whole point of the column. It's just one paragraph of this column. Maybe Neil could have done a little better on that lyric. And when you think Salman Rushdie got in trouble, I got hundreds of. There was spittle on the mail I was getting, pointing out what a genius Neil is and what a bad human being I was. And the thing about that is, if you're a humor writer and you get hate mail, which you will, you can use that. So I ended up writing a whole column about the Neil Diamond people, which generated a whole lot more mail. Some of it from Neil Diamond people, some of it from people who are on my team. And it went on, and I ended up writing a book about it, the Book of Bad Songs. So, yes, your point that when you do humor, you're going to stir up what I call the humor impaired. They are out there, and they're going to come for you.
The humor impaired, I love it. Did Neil Diamond ever contact you?
No, but you know what? A couple of years after I wrote that column, I was watching the Today Show. Katie Couric was interviewing Neil Diamond. I was watching it, and at some point she reads to him. She said, "What is this deal with this song, I Am My Son?" And he starts laughing, and he goes, "Yes, there's a guy. Some guy wrote about that." And I'm thinking, yes, Neil Diamond.
It's validation right there.
Who says we can't make a difference, John, when we get into journalism? Who says?
For years and years, we enjoyed you regularly in columns across the country. Do you miss that, or was that kind of a grind with a deadline that's nice to get away from now?
I don't miss it. It was fun. I enjoyed it. When I stopped doing it, I still enjoyed it, and that was kind of the point. I wanted to stop writing the column while I still liked it, and other people still seemed to like it. I still do write columns sometimes. At the end of the year, I write a year in review, and so I still get to do it. Not long ago, I wrote a column about the Florida Python Challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically we have a problem with pythons. They're these thousands, hundreds of thousands of Burmese pythons overrunning the Everglades. And so we had the state of Florida put on this Python Challenge. We invited people to come down and kill our pythons for money.
The New York Times has called him the funniest man in America. Every one of them. They sat him down and they're like, yeah.
They get together. The New York Times gets together and votes on this.
And they picked Dave Barry and an excellent choice. A lot of authors that I talk to and columnists, you quickly find out why they gravitated towards the written word, because they're fairly introverted and they're not used to public speaking and they're not used to talking. And you, being primarily a writer, have found yourself on the chat shows. You do the radio tours. You've done Letterman. I think you may have done Carson. You're pretty old. A TV show made about you with Harry Anderson playing Dave Barry. I don't know how a writer would ready themselves for that other life.
You're absolutely right, first of all, that one of the things you learn as a writer, especially if you write books, is that part of the job, maybe the biggest part of the job, is not writing the book, it's talking about the book. That's what you do. And some writers absolutely dread it because, as you say, it tends to be an introspective profession to begin with. What really helped me a lot, believe it or not, was teaching the effective writing seminars to business people. I spent 7 years doing that while I was developing my humor column. And I had to get up in front of, I'd be at some plant in North Carolina, some textile plant, and there'd be 32 engineers sitting in front of me, prepared to be bored to death to listen to this guy talk about effective writing. So I learned pretty quick to make them laugh, to use just funny examples of bad writing and, to just talk and to try to be amusing. And that helped me greatly when I got out of that and got into this, because I had to do this so much. Also, I had the advantage of having brilliant interviewers like yourself.
Like myself, but not me, actually.
Not you per se. Like you. They're a lot like you.
I love Neil Diamond. I'm going to hang up now.
And that's Dave Barry, and this is The Theme Machine. One of the heaviest offerings from one of our authors was Schindler's List from Thomas Keneally. The book originally was titled Schindler's Ark. The book by the Australian author chronicled an individual who, during the Holocaust, helped save the lives of hundreds of Jews. The film adaptation from Steven Spielberg garnered 7 Academy Awards. Now, this is a story that might never have seen the light of day unless its author had not stumbled into a luggage store.
I was on my way, a total accident that I came across Schindler. I was on my way back from a festival of Australian films in Italy. I happened to come through LA in the days when Sydney, Australia wasn't a glamour destination, and I was waiting for my plane, and my luggage, my briefcase had come unstuck. So I went to a luggage store in South Beverly Drive, and the owner was became a dear friend of mine, Leopold Page, and he was a Schindler survivor. And he started telling me about Schindler as we waited for my credit card charges to be cleared. He asked me what I did for a living. I said I was a writer. Anyone who went into that store and said they were a writer, a producer, in radio, in television, he hammered with this Schindler story. And he had some filing cabinets full of Schindler material out the back of the store. And he took me out and gave me a load of it and said, take that back to your hotel and read it. I took it back and I thought, this is great, because Schindler was a very flawed human being. He was not, in peacetime, he would not have been a hero. He was a scoundrel. He was an unsatisfactory Catholic. I was raised a Catholic and am a fairly unsatisfactory Catholic too. So I identified with Schindler, and I thought how remarkable that across the lines of all the racial hysteria, this generosity could have operated. And there's no doubt, no matter what's been said about Schindler, no doubt in my mind that Schindler was a hero. And I'll tell you why. No one died in either of his camps. You look at businesses which are still in existence, like Krupp's, IG Farben, even Mercedes, and you look at what happened on their factory floors, and they don't match up to Schindler's. What happened on their factory floors when they used Jewish slave labor, how many died, how well they were fed, and so on. Schindler was a hero to me, but although he was a hero, in many ways he wasn't even a moral man. He was a womanizer, black marketeer, and occasionally people who haven't read the book came up to me and said, oh, look, you must have got it wrong, because Schindler's widow says he wasn't a hero. And I do say to them, well, look, just read the book, because that's what the book's about, the fact that he wasn't a hero.
It's the writers this time on the Theme Machine. I'm John Carney. We've covered several authors and a columnist, but we've yet to peer into the world of screenwriting. Nora Ephron, who did write a book called Heartburn, better known, though, for her screenplays. She penned When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and apparently the third time was a charm as well.
Congratulations on yet another huge hit for you.
I accept your congratulations and hope they're true.
You've got Mail making $80 gazillion in the box office in its first 20 minutes. Yeah. Interesting challenge this particular time around, and I can't think of too many times this has happened, but you've got another love story with the same two actors in Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, yet they're different characters and it's a different story. Is it difficult to separate it? I mean, in the screenwriting aspect of not letting elements of the last characters from Sleepless in Seattle kind of bleed in there?
Well, the characters are very different. I mean, Tom is playing a much more, he starts out in this movie, he's really not a nice person at all.
Yeah.
At least in romantic comedy terms, he's not a nice person. He's not killing anyone or anything.
Right.
But you know, when Delia and I started writing this movie, Delia being my sister, Delia Ephron, we didn't know if Tom and Meg would want to do it. In fact, we didn't know if we were going to do it.
Sleepless in Seattle, When Harry Met Sally, and You've Got Mail, all wonderful films, but you're not going to hear it from a guy because we have to put it on our face. But these good movies all, but don't be offended by this, chick flicks.
Well,
they're all chick
I don't think that's really true. I think you'll forgive me, but a chick flick to me, all right.
That's not a bad thing.
I think the word chick flick is overused, and I feel partly responsible for it since it comes up in a very funny scene in Sleepless in Seattle. When, do you remember that scene where, well, I guess you haven't memorized the movie, John. Well, anyway, there's a scene where Rita Wilson is talking about An Affair to Remember and starts crying.
Yes, I do.
About Deborah Carr and Cary Grant and how she had the little blanket over her legs because she couldn't move.
Right.
And Tom starts doing this whole riff on The Dirty Dozen and makes fun of her and calls it a chick flick. But, you know, to me a chick flick, you'll forgive me, is Stepmom.
Well, I only asked that because I wondered if you ever had a hankering to write a Terminator sequel.
Well, no, I don't.
A lot of stuff blowing up.
I have to say that, and
no
I don't have any hankering to write it. I don't have any hankering to shoot an action movie because, you know, what you have to do is you have to shoot a lot of things like people's foot hitting the brake.
Yeah.
This is not my idea of why I make movies.
I would think, too, it's a lot more of a challenge to build the relationships.
Yes, but I just want to say, in answer to your accusation.
It wasn't an accusation.
Okay, all right. But, you know, these movies are comedies with Tom Hanks.
Little accusation.
And they're not, you know, I mean, I think there are grades of chick flicks, and on a grade of 1 to 10. 10 being An Affair to Remember or Fried Green Tomatoes, a movie I happen to love.
And Steel Magnolias.
Our movie is nowhere near those. I mean, it's funny. It has Tom. It has an entire. I bet you haven't even seen it, John. It's a very funny movie, and it has a lot of guy stuff in it. So I think it's one of those movies that a woman might want to go to, but a man wouldn't mind.
And even if I'm not even going to get stuck on the chick flick thing, never mind.
I still call them chick flicks. Sadly, we lost Miss Ephron in 2012. And yes, she was responsible for I'll Have What She's Having. As we wrap up this episode of The Theme Machine, it's a visit with a man who probably has sold more books than everyone we have featured combined. James Patterson, no doubt, the king of the fast-paced thriller, and to date has sold over 300 million books worldwide. Many of his thrillers have centered around a particular detective, Alex Cross.
Legs, or do you even look at it that way?
When I first wrote down the name, it was Alexis. And for the first 40 pages, it was a woman. And then I said, no, I don't like this. And I changed it to a man. And then I liked the way that particular story was going.
And I'm always amazed when someone can keep a series alive because the fans are so rabid. They pay attention to the utmost details, and many of them not having nearly as much to do as you. They may say some ancillary character who shows up 5 books later used to have blue eyes.
I don't get caught too much, so I think I must be doing a reasonable job at maintaining. I think the hard thing, though, is to just keep the characters growing, keep them interested, keep yourself interested in them. And I continue to be interested in Alex and what's going to happen.
You know, I never thought to ask this of an author before when we get into that serial stuff. But you had talked about constantly trying to come up with new things for them to do and new interests. What does that do in the life of James Patterson? Do you find yourself occasionally maybe signing up for something like skydiving with the motivation of, you know, this might be something that Alex might do. I should experience it.
I haven't done that, but that's a good idea. I mean, generally, what I do with the research is if Alex is going to Hawaii, I'll do the research myself. If it's a crack house in the Bronx, I usually send somebody else. Depends on what Alex is up to in terms of whether I'm going to do all the research myself or not.
Hollywood's come calling many times in television form and in film form. The two with Morgan Freeman that I enjoyed very much, Kiss the Girls and Along Came a Spider. Did that change your way of writing once you knew how that worked?
No, because there was always the Alex in the book who's much younger than Morgan Freeman, for example.
Is it different writing a screenplay than it is writing your book? Just the mindset for you?
Yeah, it's much easier. They're like 100 pages, you know. It's a piece of cake.
That's nice.
They act like it's the end of the world out there, but I think it's a lot easier than they think it is. The hard thing out there is it's like if you were painting the Sistine Chapel and you had 500 people down below directing you. That's the problem. You just have so many people in the process that it becomes a nightmare for the writer and then for the director to get the thing done, unless you really have a lot of status like a Steven Spielberg or somebody.
That's hilarious. Leonard, a little more red. What do you think?
That's hilarious if you're in the middle of it, I'll tell you that. So if mamas don't let your kids grow up to be screenwriters, you know.
But, you know, you say it's easier because it's shorter, but I would think there's a lot of freedom in novel writing where you're not answering to those critics until after it's done. With screenwriting, other people have to breathe it to life, and directors are saying, hey, he wouldn't talk this way, and why does the woman have a Jewish accent? And I would think even though the pages are shorter, the hoops are more frequent.
They just make it a lot harder than it really should be. That's why a lot of the little independent movies kind of work better, because, you know, somebody's going out and shooting them for a lot less money. They finance the thing themselves, and there's sort of nobody to get in the way.
I hate to throw the numbers out there because it's kind of like all the waiters surrounding you in a restaurant and singing happy birthday. But at one point, one of every 15 hardcover fiction books sold were yours. 170 million books of yours in print. They're reading your books on other planets. So I'm sure it's come to a point when you...
I haven't heard that, but I'm glad to hear that.
When you travel, surely you've seen people sitting reading James Patterson books. Have you ever been compelled to say something like, so what do you think about that book? Or, you know, I wrote
Yeah,
that.
every once in a while. And it's usually, I usually get a nice thing back from people. I remember one time, though, I was going around a pool somewhere, and I asked some guy, and he said, yeah, and I don't like it.
James Patterson finishes up the Theme Machine this week, and we can close the book on another episode. Hope you enjoyed our pen to paper special on authors. Next time, a look at the Kennedy dynasty, the families, the scandals, the conspiracy theories that continue to swirl around to this day. I'm John Carney. Be sure to check out our socials, and we'll see you next time on the Theme Machine.